Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca and I'm the social media manager here at Valpak. Over the last several weeks, you may have noticed that we've been focusing on how to save money and budget and how that can actually create stronger and healthier relationships. Joining us today is a subject on the matter, Dr. Terri Orbuch, also known as the Love Doctor. Welcome, Dr. Orbuch.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
It's great to have you, and thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's start with something that all relationships go through. What do you recommend for couples who are starting to notice the excitement in the relationship is fizzling a little bit?
Well, first, I think it's important to understand that when passion declines, excitement declines as well, that's an inevitable part of all romantic relationships. It has nothing to do with you or your partner or the relationship. What we know, science shows that passion and excitement declines after 12 to 18 months of being with someone. So just make sure that you have the realistic expectation that it will decline. Now, the good news is that you can reignite that passion and excitement. And you can do that with 3 tips or strategies. First, you want to add new activities with your partner. So do something that you and your partner have never done before, whether it's a class or a new restaurant, a new cuisine. Make sure that you do it together, and that newness will add the excitement. Second, you want to add a little surprise or mystery to your relationship. So any way that you can surprise your partner in a positive way, an activity, send a flirty text message during the day, show up at their work and take them out to lunch using Valpak coupons, that would be something surprising and different. And final strategy is to do what I call an arousal-producing activity. And it's clean, so you don't have to worry. But you want to do an activity with your partner that gives you that adrenaline rush, that arousal, those endorphins. And when you exercise together, ride a roller coaster ride, go to a scary movie or a comedy club, you can get that arousal transferred to your relationship and your partner. So yes, you want to know that arousal or excitement will decrease, but there are ways to add that spice again to your relationship.
Those are some great tips. Thank you so much for sharing those. Now, what about those relationships that aren't just starting to fizzle, but are starting to see some strain due to finances? What do you suggest for them?
Well, first, again, I think it's important to understand that most couples disagree about money. I've been working with couples and studying couples scientifically for almost 3 decades. And what I have found is that 75% of those couples report that money is the #1 source of tension in their relationship. So it's important to understand that most couples disagree, and know that it's how you resolve the conflict and the disagreements that really is predictive of happiness and whether or not you stay together over time. So you want to resolve the conflict well, and it's especially important for women. Women like to resolve conflict. We don't like conflict to linger. So if women can feel like we resolved the conflict well, they're more likely to be happy, and the relationship is healthier over time.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Now, many couples find the financial subject to be a little bit difficult to broach. Do you have any advice for how to make that a little bit easier to talk about?
Well, I think first, most of the time it's difficult because couples talk about money when it's a negative situation. We talk about money over tax season, or when taxes are due, when there's high credit card debt, or when we're financially strapped or strained. So we get in our heads that talking about money is negative and it's difficult and it's full of really difficult conflict. I recommend instead that couples talk about money during a neutral time period, so not when there's high debt or the credit card or bills are coming in, not around tax season, but a neutral time, and that you talk about it often. Because when we talk about it often, regularly, I like to say at least every 3 months, but if you can talk about it every month, that's wonderful. And the more you talk about it, the less tension, the easier and smoother that conversation will go. Come to the table and make sure that you don't use accusatory tones. So use your I language and not your you language. Say how something is making you feel rather than what somebody's doing that's upsetting you. So talk about it regularly and talk about it in a very constructive I language way.
That's great. Yeah, I love the constructive viewpoint, and I think that's something that's really important. Once the couple sits down and talks about their finances, how do they determine how to manage them from that point forward?
A very good question. One of the things that I have found with working with couples is that sharing in all big financial purposes is very predictive of couples being happier and stable over time. So if you're going to make a big purchase, and again, you as a couple can decide what a big purchase means. It can mean $100 purchase, it can mean $1,000 or more dollar purchase, it's up to you. But when you consult one another and you share in that decision, you're part of the team, you're part of a partnership, and that produces happiness. We're in this together. We're doing a team approach. Again, that predicts happiness, and it's more predictive of happiness for women than men.
Well, speaking of big financial decisions, what about when one person wants to buy something at the store? Should they always ask for permission for that?
I think it depends on the couple, but what I like to propose to couples is that they come up with what I call a threshold amount. And a threshold amount is an amount of money that if you as an individual buy something that's more than that amount, you then go back to your partner and ask for permission. So let's say your threshold amount is $50. So that means when you go out and you buy your Starbucks coffee, you get your haircut or your nails or you go golfing, and it's less than $50, you don't have to call your partner and say, can I do this? But if you're going to purchase something or do something that's more than $50, then you would have a discussion and consult and share in the decision together. So the answer really depends on the couple, what they pick as a threshold amount.
Well, last week we were on our LuvNMoney Twitter party, and we had some great questions from our followers. I wanted to address some of the ones that I thought would be beneficial, not just to those who asked them, but to others on a much broader scale. So the first one is from Kimmy, and she asked, when dating, is it okay to talk about finances? How and when should you bring that up?
Well, it's a very good question, Kimmy. I get that question asked a lot to me. I think that you should not bring up finances on the first few dates when you go out with someone. But after that, you can approach the topic. But you don't want to ask a question like, do you save, or how much money do you make, or what's your salary? But I think if you share aspects of yourself, like let's say you just went on a vacation, you might share with this person that you're dating that you went on a vacation and you spent X amount of money. It was great. It was more or less than you thought. You stayed at a hotel or you went camping. You're glad you went camping. You like those kinds of vacations. What you're doing in sharing that story is telling this person about your spending and saving decisions and habits and behaviors. And then after you tell your story, when you reveal personal information about yourself, you would then say to this person, well, what kinds of vacations do you go on? What gym do you work out at? Or what kinds of leisure activities do you spend money on? So it's not a direct question, but it will get at the same pieces of information. But again, after the third, fourth, or fifth date. Now, on the first few dates, You don't want to ask questions, I think, because it makes people get defensive. But you can also be a good, what I call detective. Watch how much they tip someone at a restaurant. What kinds of things are they spending money on? What kinds of dates are they organizing or arranging? Those kinds of behaviors, patterns, are just as important and tell us about savings and spending habits as asking and telling stories about yourself.
I love your suggestion of kind of using a story and having kind of that softer conversation, because I think it does make it a little more comfortable, but yeah, it's very telling. And speaking of couples, in general, we know that we save for retirement, we save for college funds and all of that, but Tony B asked a good question. What's one thing that couples forget to save for?
Well, good, Tony B. I think the things that couples tend to save for are big purchases like homes and cars. And if they're doing other kinds of savings, it would be in terms of the children. So education for the children, how to support the children. But what most couples forget about is when they're older, when they're retired. What kinds of money will they need when they are older? And so I encourage people always to set goals for saving and spending. You want to set goals that are short term, and short term might be next week, next month, or next year, but you also want to have the conversations about the long-term goals, and that would be 5 to 10 years from now. And I'm a big proponent, a big advocate of asking questions like, if we won the lottery, where would we travel to and why? 20, 25 years from now, if we were financially secure, what would we want to do, or what would you want to do? Those are the kinds of fun questions that you not only can tell your own story or answers to, but you can ask your partner. And they get at the long-term goals and planning as a couple. So again, instead of asking your partner, what do you want to save for in 20 years from now? You want to ask the fun questions, because finances and money do not have to be difficult topics to talk about. They don't have to be conflict-oriented. What they can be are fun topics to talk about, and you can talk about them wherever. They don't have to be serious. They can be fun.
Well, one of the overarching themes we noticed during our Twitter party last week was that everyone knew that they needed to talk about money and discuss this with their significant others, but when they're in the middle of a conversation, how do they know where they should stand firm and where compromise is necessary?
Very good question. Well, I think relationships are all about compromise and adjustment. So no matter what topic you're talking about, whether it's sex or, how to raise the children or saving, spending, financial issues, it's all about adjusting and compromise. But I think compromise has gotten a real bad rap. When you think compromise, you think, oh, I'm just going to melt into this other person. I won't have any independence. Me won't be a part of this relationship at all. And I want to encourage people listening and viewing this to think more positively about compromise. Compromise can mean different things to different people. Yes, it can mean I need to do it your way, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be, I can do it your way for a month and you'll do it my way for the next month. It can be that we come somewhere in the middle. So part of me is in this decision and part of you is in this decision. Or, even more exciting, it can be a third option outside of either of our approaches or meaning to money, where we take a risk or we try something new and different. Now remember, that can add a little passion and excitement, but it also is part of compromise. So relationships are all about adjustment, but don't think negatively about compromise or adjustment.
Thank you. And now, being in relationships don't just involve you and your significant other, but a lot of times they also involve extended family. Nupur wanted to know, what's the best way to discuss money with extended family if it happens to come up?
Well, I think it does depend on your family and how involved they are giving you money or you giving them money. But in general, I would say that you never want to give money advice to another family member unless they ask. And that's probably the golden rule that I encourage couples to abide by no matter what the topic. Never give advice to family members unless they ask you. And then you also still want to be cautious. But let's say the topic arises or comes up with a family member. I think it is totally okay to talk about money and finances in a general approach or a general way or approach. So what do people do in this instance? Or what are the different options if you want to save for a house? Or what kinds of coupons might you use with your partner in a general way? If a family member gets very specific and asks questions about you and your partner, I think it is important to set boundaries, to set limits in what you talk about with a family member. So you don't want to talk about individual or personal kinds of things, money decisions, because that is between you and your partner. Now, if you and your partner decide as a team to discuss or ask for advice from a family member, that's another thing. But if it's you as an individual and a family member asks you, how much do you have in your savings account? Remember, set your boundaries, have your limits, and it's definitely okay to say, Mom, that's a great question, but my partner and I haven't quite coordinated that savings account yet. So don't put that question off. Be respectful of the family member, but don't feel like that you need to answer the question. Boundaries are totally okay between you and other family members.
So we've talked boundaries, we've talked compromise, we've touched a lot of different points when discussing finances with your significant other. But finally, do you have any tips on how to make financial decisions, saving, budgeting, all those conversations feel less like a chore and more like a couple's activity?
Well, first, I encourage people to put a date to discuss finances on the calendar. And it's not a, oh no, it's a date to discuss finances. It's a, how exciting. Let's do something before or after, but let's make finances part of that date night. And now, it's important to understand that men like to discuss difficult topics like finances, if it's still a difficult or tension-filled topic with your partner. Men like to discuss difficult topics side by side, and that's important for women to understand. So they're really good at discussing finances as you're walking around the block in your neighborhood, as you're taking a hike, as you're walking around the city or a mall, regardless of where you are in the country or the season that you're doing it in. Side by side really works well and is fun and productive for men. Now, women, on the other hand, like to discuss difficult topics face to face. So we like to, being a woman, like to discuss finances as we're having dinner, as we're having coffee, over a drink, at the kitchen table. So it's all about compromise again. Make sure that sometimes you discuss it when you are at a quiet restaurant or in your kitchen or going out for brunch or coffee on a Sunday morning. Pick the right situation and the right timing. And other times it might be doing an activity. So make it a fun activity. Put a date night or a date errand or a date Sunday on your calendar and make sure you do something new and different either before or after.
Thank you. And that's actually a nuance that I never really noticed before, the face-to-face versus the side-by-side, but now that you bring it up, it's definitely true with my husband. So I will keep that in mind the next time we decide to have that conversation.
I should say one other hint, by the way, that's a difference between men and women, is that men and women deal with conflict in different ways. We as women hold on to the conflict for at least 2 to 3 days. We have a conflict or a disagreement with our partner, and then we go away and we think about it and we analyze it and we obsess over it. We say, should I have said this? What did that mean? Maybe I should discuss it more. And then we go back to our partner. But men, assuming our partner is male, we go to our partner and they have compartmentalized the conflict or disagreement. They've gone on to the next issue. So when we say, can we discuss what we were disagreeing about yesterday, they have no idea what we're talking about. And when they say, oh, what were we discussing? We get upset. Why wasn't it as important to them? Why didn't they hold on to that conflict for 2 to 3 days? So men and women deal with conflict and tension over money in very different ways, and it's important to respect those differences and understand that if he's gone on and compartmentalized it, just because we have thought about it for 2 to 3 days does not mean that he has.
That is great advice. I will keep that in mind the next time I talk to my husband really about anything, not just finances.
About anything.
Well, I loved all of these ideas, and I hope our audience did too. Again, thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Orbuch.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And check out more of Dr. Terri's great advice on Behind the Blue at www.valpak.com/blog, or follow her on Twitter at Dr. Terri Love Doctor. Thank you for joining us today, and happy saving.